You're just a tool. Vera, a highly replaceable one. So, we're letting you go. That was the sentence, word for word, spoken to my face at 10:02 a.m. on a Wednesday, not even 48 hours after I'd been promoted to Chief Systems Architect, the very role I'd been quietly building toward for 9 years. I stood there, frozen in place, trying to understand what was happening. Just 2 days ago, this very room had echoed with applause when Malcolm announced my promotion to Chief Systems Architect. My face was on the quarterly deck. People shook my hand. One intern even cried. But now, Malcolm's tone was cold, efficient. "We're restructuring," he said, like it was weather. "And it's time for new blood. You've done great things, but we're moving in a different direction." The words hit me like static, loud, jarring, meaningless. My stomach twisted. I gripped the edge of the chair I had just stood from. I've worked in tech for over 2 decades. I've survived economic downturns, security breaches, 3 mergers, and a server fire that nearly took down the company's entire infrastructure. I designed the very security protocols that protected this conference room. And now, I was being walked out of it like a temp caught stealing staplers. I kept my face still. That's what you do in these moments. You don't cry, you don't plead, you memorize every syllable, every smirk, every betrayal. Malcolm didn't pause. He gestured to HR, who stepped forward with a folder already prepped. "We're offering a generous severance, provided you agree not to discuss company IP or your time here." I nodded once, collected my laptop, and walked out. Malcolm Trask was everything I wasn't. Young, untested, and born with a last name that opened doors. He knew how to shake hands at fundraisers and talk in circles around technical questions. What he didn't know was how to write a single line of the code I built, the code that powered our $1.7 billion logistics engine. Back at my desk, I plugged in my charger one last time. Just muscle memory. My inbox was still open. That's when I saw it. A draft email from Malcolm's executive assistant. Subject: "Welcome Chloe, Oralis's new Chief Systems Architect." Timestamp: Monday, 10:47 p.m. So that's what I was. A placeholder. A name on a Monday slideshow, already deleted by Wednesday, 2 days earlier. They were clapping for me. As I pulled out of Oralis's parking garage, my hands still trembling from the humiliating dismissal, the memory of Monday morning played in my mind like a cruel parody. How could a moment that had felt so full of hope, so earned, already feel like a lie? It had started with bagels and balloons. An all-hands meeting at 9 sharp. Malcolm stood front and center with his signature, overly rehearsed smile, his sleeves cuffed just right for that young visionary look. "Team," he announced, "we are entering the next phase of our future, and it starts with honoring those who built the foundation." Then he turned to me. "Vera Linnell," he said, "has carried this company through firewalls and failures, crashes and crises. Today, we promote her to Chief Systems Architect." The applause was thunderous. Some stood. One of the interns, Emma, I think, wiped away a tear. I was handed a bouquet, a custom pen engraved with Chief Vera, and escorted to the podium like I'd won an Oscar. I don't do speeches, but I spoke from the heart. "The best systems," I said, "are invisible when they work. My job has always been to make things function so others can shine. I'm proud to keep building what you all stand on." People hugged me. Someone brought cake. My inbox flooded with subject lines like, "Congrats!" and "Long overdue." But even then, beneath the smiles, I felt something off. A silence behind certain stares. A stiffness in a few handshakes. That afternoon, I went into the women's restroom to escape the spotlight. I just needed a breath. That's when I heard it. Malcolm's voice. In the next stall over, on the phone. "She doesn't suspect a thing," he said, casual as if ordering lunch. "Let her enjoy the week. She's legacy code. I'm future-proofing the org." My stomach dropped. He laughed. She'll be gone by Wednesday. Chloe's onboarding starts Friday. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, the tiles beneath me cold and foreign. He had planned this, all of it. The announcement, the party, the applause. It was a curtain call in disguise. As I stepped out, he was at the sink. He met my eyes and said, "That speech? Nailed it. You're a natural." I nodded, smiled. Even. I'd learned a long time ago that the sharpest blade hides behind silence. Back at my desk, I opened LinkedIn. The company had posted the announcement. Aralis proudly congratulates Vera Linnell on her promotion to Chief Systems Architect. But something caught my eye. The post had been edited, originally published at 9:43 a.m., edited at 9:46 a.m. I clicked View Edit History. The new version added a sentence, "As we continue to build our next-gen leadership pipeline." Why would they mention a next-gen pipeline in a post about my promotion? Unless it wasn't really mine. Not for long. I closed the tab and opened my calendar. That's when I saw it. An event that hadn't been there before. Private. Hidden from the main team view. Friday, 9:00 a.m. Chloe. Onboarding session. So it was all performative. I wasn't being honored. I was being prepped for removal. I stared at the bouquet on my desk, now wilting slightly under the fluorescence. A few petals had fallen onto the keyboard. I had given them everything, nights, weekends, holidays. I'd saved this company from collapse more times than I could count, and they had handed me a stage not to celebrate me, but to distract me. The betrayal wasn't in the firing. It was in the fact that they'd clapped while doing it. I turned off my monitor, sat still. Let the betrayal settle, not to break me, but to burn into memory. They thought Monday was my beginning. It was my exit music. They didn't give me a security escort, just a cardboard box. HR stood at a distance like I was radioactive. My badge still worked. Though, no one had revoked it yet. Typical. They fired me before they understood what I actually had access to. I walked slowly through the quiet hallway back to my office, box under one arm, severance folder under the other. The same hallway I'd jogged through during a midnight outage. The same hallway I'd paced in nervous circles while the system we'd built held the supply chain of 3 continents. Today, it was silent. No one looked up. No one said anything. My desk sat where I left it Monday, still decorated with the congratulatory balloons they taped to my monitor. The air smelled like vanilla and toner. My plants hadn't been watered. I pulled open the bottom drawer. The box I kept for just in case was still there, folded, dusty, quietly waiting for the day I hoped would never come. I started packing. The mug first. A birthday gift from my team 2 years ago, printed with binary code that spelled Queen of the Stack. Then the notepad with the coffee-stained page, my original sketch of the routing engine that saved Aurelius millions. My lucky flash drive, a stress ball I never used. And then I found the photo. It was faded, printed on office paper and tucked behind a book. In it, I sat cross-legged on the floor in the data center, my laptop on my knees, wires everywhere. Behind me, a Christmas tree leaned against the wall, bare, undecorated. Christmas Eve, 4 years ago, that night. The network collapsed. A sync bug corrupted the back end, and no one else could trace it. Everyone else was with family. I was here, patching, debugging, writing emergency code by the glow of the server room. I worked through midnight, powered by stale coffee and adrenaline. Malcolm called me once from Aspen. The video call crackled. He was holding a champagne flute. Snow behind him. Music in the background. "Is it serious?" he'd asked. "It's the backbone," I'd replied. "It's down." He gave me a half laugh. "Think you can fix it before morning? People have gifts to ship." I fixed it by 4:08 a.m. They never mentioned it in the January newsletter. Now that photo was going in the box. I stood there a while, just holding it. All those years, all those nights, they lived in this office. The smudges on the keyboard, the chair cushion I'd swapped out after the old one gave me back pain. Even the floor mat had my shoe print worn in, and it was all being erased like I never existed. A soft knock came from behind me. I turned to see Lucas, the new intern, baby-faced, awkward, but smart, but the kind who stayed late and asked the right questions. "Hi, Ms. Linnell," he said, stepping forward. "I just wanted to say—" His eyes shifted. He saw the HR rep behind me, standing with arms crossed, watching. Lucas stopped mid-sentence, his shoulders tensed. He glanced back at HR, then back at me, apologetically. "Never mind, good luck," he muttered, before turning and walking away. I didn't stop him. I didn't blame him. That's how this place worked now. Everyone looking over their shoulder, afraid of breathing wrong. Even silence had a supervisor. I turned back to my box, placed the photo at the bottom. It felt heavier than the rest. My hands moved slower now, each object carrying a weight I hadn't expected. The finality of it all. When the box was full, I gave one last look around. The lights flickered once, like they always did after noon. The smart bulbs never calibrated properly in this section. I'd flagged it twice. No one fixed it. Figures. I slid the box off the desk, tucked it against my hip, and wheeled my chair back in. The hallway felt longer on the way out. I passed the server room, the one I'd defended like a lioness. I looked up at the security camera above the door. I installed that one myself, after a breach scare. No one would remember that. No plaque, no name on the wall, just Vera Linnell, boxed, bagged, and gone before lunch. But what they didn't know, what no one thought to check, was that the systems I built still recognized me. And the mirror server? That was still live. The glass doors shut behind me with a whisper. Not a word, not a nod. No one followed, no one looked up. I walked to my car carrying 9 years of loyalty in a cardboard box. It sat awkwardly in the passenger seat, like a child I didn't know how to comfort. The HR folder slid halfway out. I didn't bother tucking it back in. Let it hang, let it spill. There was nothing left to protect. I pulled the door shut, turned the key, and sat for a moment with the engine humming low. Then, I did what anyone would do when the world suddenly shrinks. I reached for my phone. 3 names. That's all I needed. Just 3. The first, Harper. We started at Auralie's the same month. She was the one who swore we'd make it to VP together. 2 women in a man's world, writing code and rewriting the rules. I tapped her name. It rang 5 times. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same. The second, Leo. We'd built the early prototypes side by side, argued over algorithms, stayed late to debug when everyone else went home. He once told me I was the real CTO. I texted, "Got some news, can we talk?" His reply came a minute later. "Let's talk later." 2 words, period. No emoji, no warmth. The third, Jen. We ate lunch together almost every day. She knew about my divorce before my sister did. She brought me soup when I had bronchitis. I texted her, too. "It's official. They let me go." A few minutes passed. Then, her response. "Wish I could talk. Eyes everywhere. Stay safe." That one hurt. I stared at the screen for a long time. Eyes everywhere. What did that even mean? Since when did a workplace feel like a surveillance state? I wasn't angry at them. I understood the fear. But the silence wrapped around me like a wool blanket. Heavy, itchy, suffocating, not a single real goodbye. Just corporate choreography, clap, nod, erase. I drove home in silence. The roads blurred. The box sat untouched beside me. When I finally walked through the front door, I dropped it on the couch and sat on the floor. Just sat. And then, without thinking, I opened my laptop. The muscle memory kicked in. Log in. Check system load. Run backups. These were reflexes, not choices. My hands knew what to do before my head caught up. I typed in my Oralis credentials. I expected a lockout message. Access revoked. Account disabled. Instead, the dashboard loaded. Not just any access. Admin panel access. I blinked, refreshed. Still there. The full interface, dev tools, audit logs, mirror node maps, my full environment. They hadn't revoked anything, 9 years of responsibility, and they forgot to lock the door behind me. I clicked over to the mirror server I'd maintained personally. A lightweight testing clone of our production environment, synced hourly, accessible only by a handful of senior staff. Last login, v.lionel. So they hadn't even reassigned it. It was all still mine. I leaned back, staring at the screen. My face reflected in the monitor. Same tired eyes, same quiet mouth. But something behind them had shifted. They fired me like I was disposable, but left the infrastructure, my infrastructure, untouched. They'd taken the title, the office, the announcements, but not the system. The room was silent except for the hum of my laptop fan. The shadows from the blinds cut clean lines across the carpet. I didn't touch a thing, not yet. I just sat there, watching the screen, heartbeat slow, breath even, letting the truth settle in. I wasn't cut off. I wasn't locked out. They severed me from the surface, but they forgot I still lived in the code. If they left the door open, I had every right to walk through it. Still seated at my kitchen table, the light from my laptop spilling across half-filled coffee mugs and yesterday's mail. I opened a new tab and typed the address I hadn't visited in years. Not since the day I swore I'd only return if they gave me a reason. They just had. I typed in the address, linnellsystems.net. Login, v.lionel, password, unchanged. The dashboard loaded without hesitation. Minimalist, precise, unfussy, just like I'd built it. Welcome back, v.lionel. It was still there, every backup, every private framework, every script I'd written outside Oralis hours, but later refined inside their ecosystem. And more importantly, every legal boundary I had so carefully drawn around it. Linnell Systems LLC had never been for profit. Not yet. It was a safety net, a vault. I'd registered it under my mother's name in 2021, Evelyn Linnell, a retired law professor who specialized in intellectual property law. She'd always told me, never invent something you don't have a home for. That year, Oralis had tried to slip a new clause into our contracts. Quietly. Buried between performance metrics and bonus targets was a line that would have handed them full ownership of anything developed using company-adjacent concepts. Company-adjacent. That was their word. And I wasn't about to hand over my brain just because I drank coffee on their premises. So I built my home elsewhere. Linnell Systems became a dormant LLC, a place to store IP developed fully on my own time, using my own resources. I kept it quiet, separate, legally distinct, untouchable. I clicked into the archive labeled Failover Protocols. There it was. Emergency, Transfer, Protocol, VL.docs, created, September 12, 2021. My fingers hovered for a moment before I opened the file. It was all there. Instructions to migrate my architecture, my engine, away from Oralis in under 24 hours. Scripts to rebuild the full framework under a new namespace. Legal memos confirming the system's origin predates any signed reassignment. A step-by-step timeline for a mirror pull, relabel, and live deploy. Not written in haste, not written in anger, written in foresight. I had spent years being told I was too careful, too rigid, that I documented things no one cared about, that no one would ever question my loyalty. So why worry? This was why. I switched tabs and pulled up my encrypted email archive, searched for a message dated around the time I wrote the protocol. There it was, sent to my mother. Subject, just in case they haven't done it yet, but I see where it's going. Someday, I might need to take back what's mine. If that day comes, Linnell Systems will hold the line. V. I stared at the words I barely remembered writing, but now they rang louder than anything spoken aloud this week. I wasn't angry anymore. That emotion had already passed through me, burned and gone. What remained now was something colder, clearer. I was right to prepare. They fired me without blinking, without checking what legal ties still bound them to the very system they depended on. They assumed I'd move on, but the problem with treating someone like a replaceable part is forgetting they might hold the blueprint. I leaned back in my chair, the wooden frame creaking under the shift. Outside, the city moved like it always did. Cars passing, porch lights glowing, ordinary life oblivious to quiet war rooms like this one. My eyes scanned the last line of the document again. This protocol is to be executed only under hostile conditions. Signed, V. Linnell, V. Tonight. I wasn't launching anything. I wasn't hitting execute. I wasn't staging revenge. Not yet. But I was remembering who I was. I closed the folder, but didn't shut the laptop. Linnell Systems never died. It simply waited. Like I had. And now, it was awake. That thought settled in quietly as I stared at the glowing screen. One tab held the Linnell Systems protocol file, still untouched, still ready. But before I made a single move, I needed to confirm something that mattered even more than code or servers. I needed to confirm the contract still protected me. I navigated to my personal archive, a cloud drive organized by decade, then by employer, then by year. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Working in tech long enough teaches you companies lose documents. But people like me, we keep receipts. I opened the folder marked Oralis Employment Docs 2018. Inside it was the document I was looking for. IP Ownership Addendum Final. PDF. My heart didn't race this time. No heat in my throat. Just a calm, razor-sharp clarity. Page 17. Clause 14b. 3. I scrolled. There it was, right where I remembered it. Unchanged. All intellectual property developed by senior engineers shall remain under joint custodial ownership until a formal written reassignment is signed and executed by both parties. I leaned back and smiled, not out of arrogance, but because I was right to trust my instincts. That clause had saved me once before, and now, it was doing it again. It had been my clause. I drafted it in 2018, after Oralis nearly lost a major CRM platform to a disgruntled engineer who walked out with the source code and a questionable contract. Legal was in disarray. Our CTO panicked. I was the only one who understood both the structure and the stakes. I rewrote the entire section on IP policy over one sleepless weekend. Staying up with cold tea and legal dictionaries, Clause 14b, 3 was my way of ensuring that senior engineers couldn't be robbed of their work without a signed and dated transfer. A safety net, a final line of defense. The executives barely read it. They just needed something that sounded enforceable. They signed it Monday morning, thanked me for my initiative, and moved on. But they never updated it. Not in 5 years. I searched the HR portal to be sure. Still had access, read only. Of course. But enough. My status. Employee type. Senior engineer IP custody, shared. Pending formal reassignment. No formal reassignment ever filed. No termination addendum closing the loop. Just a firing and a folder full of assumptions. I closed the HR tab and opened a blank page in my notebook. What I have. Joint IP ownership by default. No reassignment paperwork. Emergency transfer protocol through Linnell Systems. Full access to mirrored development environment. Legal backup from original 2018 policy, everything I needed. Laid out in bullet points like the world's cleanest battlefield map. They thought they closed the door on me. But the paperwork, the boring, bureaucratic, legally binding paperwork, hadn't followed. They locked me out of the building. But not out of the system, not out of ownership, not out of the structure I had quietly built around myself. I sipped my now cold coffee, eyes drifting to the stack of manila folders from HR sitting on the floor beside me. Useless, irrelevant. They thought termination was the end, but I knew better, because I wrote the fine print. And while they were celebrating their new hire and patting themselves on the back for future-proofing the team, I was sitting here with a clause that turned their billion-dollar system into a co-owned asset. They fired an engineer, but they forgot they'd fired a strategist. I looked back at the clause once more. Simple, elegant, ironclad. Tomorrow, they'd realize they couldn't launch without me. That the product they thought they controlled wasn't legally theirs. That the one thing holding it all together was the one clause they never even read. I closed the file. Not with vengeance, not even with satisfaction. Just certainty. Because the code might have been theirs. But the custody? That was still mine. I didn't need coffee. I didn't need music. I didn't need courage. All I needed was focus. At 7:19 a.m., I was already seated at my kitchen table, the glow of the screen bouncing off the rim of the coffee mug I hadn't touched. A quiet tension hung in the air. Not like a storm, but like a scalpel, sharp, sterile, controlled. Everything had been checked, twice. Then, once more after midnight. The emergency protocol was ready, the legal framework airtight, the servers were live, the clause was untouched, and now, it was time to move from preparation to execution. I launched the migration, quietly pushing all 78 modules into the secure vault I had prepared inside Linnell Systems. It wasn't a hack, it wasn't a theft, it was a formal handoff to myself. The system responded with precision. One by one, the modules began to move. Transferring, core, routing, engine. Transferring, inventory, AI predictive, layer. Transferring, client, auth, API. Each block of code slid into the vault like it had always belonged there. Above the log panel, a timer ticked steadily. 8 seconds, 9 seconds, 10 seconds. The transfer was clean, silent, legal. No anger, no thrill, just movement, deliberate, controlled, mine. Around 7:29, a red alert blinked at the top corner of my screen. Secondary login detected. C. Hendricks. Location, Aralis. HQ. Access level, limited Chloe. I didn't flinch. I paused the queue. Watched. She entered the engineering sandbox, poked around the live log viewer, scrolled through the migration timestamps, then froze. A few seconds passed, and then she backed out. No questions, no messages, no commands. She saw what was happening and left. Quickly. Because Chloe wasn't stupid, she was just in over her head. They gave her my job, but not my systems. They gave her access, but not architecture. And when she caught a glimpse of the machine humming beneath her feet, she realized she didn't even know how it was wired. I resumed the transfer. Transferring, fulfillment risk engine. Transferring, network optimizer. Transferring, redundancy, mapper core. The final bar turned green. A soft chime played from the speakers. Subtle, almost delicate. Transfer complete. 78 modules successfully migrated. I ended it with one last move, revoking Aralis' access to everything. The mirror node, the backup systems, the command center, all of it. From this point on, they were no longer even guests in the house they thought they owned. Then I severed their connection entirely. With one final command, I stripped Aralis of all access to the mirror server, quietly locking them out of the very system they thought they controlled. It was done. I sat back, not in triumph, but in clarity. My hands rested on the table, my shoulders loose. The kitchen was still. The clock ticked above the stove. The laptop fan whispered in the quiet. Outside, the sun crept in through the blinds. The world looked the same, but something beneath it had shifted. Somewhere in Aralis HQ, Their new chief systems architect was probably settling into her desk, preparing for another day of pretending she understood what she was in charge of. And when they tried to launch the engine, they'd notice. Not a crash, not an error, not a red screen warning, just absence. A perfect, deliberate silence. By the time they realized what was missing, it wouldn't be theirs anymore. By 8:45 a.m., they knew something was wrong. I wasn't there to see it. Of course, I was at home, still in my sweatshirt, sipping day-old coffee, watching the morning light inch across the countertop. My laptop sat closed. My hands were still. I didn't need to check anything. I already knew what they were seeing. Not a crash. Not an explosion. Emptiness. At Auralis HQ. The engineers were the first to panic. The staging environment wouldn't load. DevOps tried rebooting the container clusters, but the logs were barren. A junior developer opened a Slack thread. Is the deployment stuck? Someone else replied, nothing's returning from the inventory engine. That's when the flags started flying. By 9:05 a.m., the temporary CTO, Mika Thompson, had been pulled into an emergency stand-up. She had worked under me for nearly 4 years, smart, capable, but not looped in on the systems I built after Chloe's appointment. She opened the back-end dashboard. What she saw was silence. Not errors. Those would have been a gift. This was stillness. All API endpoints responded with a single repeated message. License server not found. A warning flashed across her console. Calls to core routing. Fulfillment logic. And network optimization were being redirected. Not internally. Externally. To a server they didn't control. One of the senior engineers froze. That's not one of ours, he said. That's off-site. The CTO pulled up the address. Encrypted. Obscured. But the host name was still visible. linnellsystems.net. And in that moment, she must have known. She clicked into the request logs. Each API call carried a small, persistent tag, one I had built years ago to verify trusted channels. Verified via Linnell node token. No one spoke. Meanwhile, Chloe was nowhere to be found. Her Slack status blinked away. Her email inbox auto-replied with currently in meetings. But the calendar was empty. And the partners, the partners, had begun to notice. By 10:15, messages flooded in. From logistics, routing engine won't respond. We're in queue overflow. From retail partners in Germany. System rejecting SKUs. Status unknown. From legal. Did we change vendors for supply chain AI? They didn't realize it yet, but they weren't dealing with a malfunction. They were staring at a skeleton, an operational frame with no vital organs. The UI was intact, the dashboard still pretty, but the logic, the movement, the intelligence was gone. Migrated. Cleanly. Legally. Mine. Back in my kitchen. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and let the weight of it settle. They weren't broken. They were empty. And that, I knew, was far worse. I checked my phone once. A forwarded email from my old Auralis inbox had made its way through the auto-forward system I'd left in place. Hey Vera, hope you're doing okay. We'd love to catch up sometime this week. Just a chat. Let us know when works. No apology, no accountability. Just a calm, friendly attempt to rope me back in, as if this were a misunderstanding, not a map they never bothered to read. I didn't respond. They hadn't read the clause. They hadn't followed the protocol. They hadn't even changed the locks. All I did was take back what was already mine. And now, without the license key, they were left with the skin of a system, the bones of something once alive. The engine still looked the same, but it wouldn't move without my voice. They'd given Chloe the title, the salary, the business cards, but they hadn't given her the map. And when she logged in, she'd seen it, seen the migration, the activity, the movement she couldn't stop, and backed away without touching a thing. They always underestimate silence. And today, that silence was deafening. I opened my laptop, not to check on them, but to check on my own systems. The vault logs were clear, every module humming quietly, every endpoint under my control. No failed transfers, no intrusions, just a system, alive and well, just not theirs anymore. They didn't lose the platform, they just lost the right to run it. The first call came at 10:08 a.m. Malcolm. I didn't answer. I let it vibrate across the kitchen table while I sliced a green apple into even, deliberate wedges. The screen flashed, then faded. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Still Malcolm. This time, I flipped the phone over, face down. They always call once the silence turns against them. I didn't need to check my inbox to know what was waiting, but I did anyway. Curiosity, not urgency. 3 new emails had already landed, one from legal, one from HR, and one from Malcolm himself, sent from his personal address. A subject line that made me raise an eyebrow. Let's reconnect. A 4th call buzzed. I watched the name glow on the screen, then vanish. I opened the first email. It was from Aralis Legal. We've observed activity that suggests unauthorized movement of proprietary systems. Please advise if this is a misunderstanding or if legal review is necessary. Polite. Tense. And 3 days too late. Next came HR. Hi Vera, just wondering if we could have a quick conversation today. Open to your schedule. Let us know what works best. They were still pretending this was mutual, still using the same smooth, HR-approved language they used in every exit script. Transition, realignment, restructure. They hadn't called it what it was. A betrayal. Then Malcolm's email. Hey Vera, hope you're doing all right. I realize things may have escalated. We're in a bind here. And I'm hoping we can bring you back in, maybe in an advisory role under NDA. We can't offer what we used to. Of course. But we're open to terms if you are. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years. No mention of the public demotion. The boardroom silence. The fake Monday applause. Just a leash with a smaller collar. I opened my personal archive. Dragged one file into a new message. Clause Haas 14b. 3. IP custody.pdf. No subject line, no message body, just the clause. It was the same clause I wrote myself in 2018, during a licensing dispute that nearly sank our client portfolio. A clause most people never read. A clause that clearly stated, intellectual property developed under Vera Linnell's lead remains shared ownership until formally reassigned by signed and executed documentation, mutually acknowledged by both parties. No such document existed. They never re-signed, because they never expected to need to. I hit send and turned off email notifications. They wanted me quiet. I gave them silence, but on my terms. The phone buzzed again, another number. I didn't answer, instead. I opened the kettle and poured hot water over dried chamomile. Let the steam rise. Let the tension drop. My hands were steady, my breath even. They thought power was in the offer, but power is in refusal. They'd replaced me without blinking, stripped my badge, canceled my accounts, pretended Chloe could do what I did. Now the machine sat dead in their hands, and they were calling the one person who had never needed a title to hold control. It would have been easy to feel smug, but I didn't. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. They had called me legacy, disposable, a tool, and now they were offering me a fraction of my own worth. Hidden behind advisory titles and discounted NDAs, because it was cheaper than admitting they'd lost something irreplaceable. I stirred my tea, let it steep, then checked one last thing. The vault logs were untouched. No breach attempts, no forced logins, no system overrides. Just one digital ecosystem, alive, humming, unbothered. Mine. I put my phone into airplane mode, folded my laptop shut, and walked away from the kitchen table. No response, no retaliation, just control. They tried to erase me with a clause. I answered them with the same one. It was 9:05 a.m. when the email arrived. I wasn't watching the inbox, counting seconds, or holding my breath. I was barefoot in the kitchen, swirling oat milk into my coffee, the morning rain tapping gently on the window like a metronome. There was no tension in the air, no panic, no rush, just stillness. By the time I sat down at my desk, the subject line was already pulsing on the screen. License agreement proposal, urgent. I clicked it open without hesitation. Dear Ms. Linnell, we respectfully request the opportunity to re-establish access to the Linnell Systems platform under a paid license agreement. Please advise your terms at earliest convenience. Best regards. J. Kramer Legal Department, Auralis Tech. No mention of the Wednesday morning firing. No talk of miscommunication or restructuring. Just a formal, cold acknowledgement that their system no longer belonged to them. They'd stopped pretending I was replaceable. They'd stopped pretending Chloe had things under control. They weren't trying to erase me anymore. They were asking to rent what they once stole. I didn't feel giddy or triumphant. I didn't fist pump or laugh. Instead, I opened my archived payroll records. 9 years of service, 9 years of slow promotions, tight budgets, and under-the-table credit theft. I scrolled to the last pay stub, my final salary before the Wednesday they shoved me out. I multiplied the number by 10, not because I needed the money, but because that was what it had cost me to stay silent all those years, what it had cost to smile through meetings while others took credit, to stay late on Christmas Eve when the server crashed, fixing it alone while Malcolm skied in Tahoe. They thought my price was negotiable. It wasn't. I opened a clean contract template. The letterhead at the top read, Linnell Systems LLC established, September 2021. Ownership private. I typed carefully. The license would be renewable annually, non-transferable, full access, but with no edit permissions to foundational code. And the most important line, annual licensing fee, 10x Vera Linnell's last recorded Auralis salary. And just before hitting save, I added one last clause, tucked in near the footer, written in soft gray font, renewal subject to Linnell Systems' future terms and discretion, a single sentence. But it meant they would never again control the conditions. It meant I could raise the price, change the rules, pull the plug, and they would have no say. I attached the contract, opened a blank email, no greeting, no explanation. Please find the proposed license terms attached. Linnell Systems will await your signature. That was it. I sent it. And I exhaled. Not with relief, not with vengeance, but with clarity. They had fired me on a Wednesday, and now, on Friday, they were begging for access to something I had already given up on, until they forced my hand. I stood, walking back to the window, the warm mug cradled between my palms, my orchid, the one I thought had died last year, had bloomed again. Soft lilac, edged with white, resilient things have a way of returning. Behind me, my laptop pinged again. I didn't check it right away, I already knew. They would sign. They had no other choice. The skeleton system had buckled. Their engineers were locked out. Clients were asking questions. Deadlines had passed. And now they were coming back to the person they dismissed as legacy code. I hadn't taken anything from them. I'd simply reclaimed what had always been mine. Calm isn't weakness. It's power that doesn't need to shout. Every time they boot up the system from now on, every time they process an order, update a dashboard, close a deal, they'll be doing it with my architecture, on my code, under my terms, and at the bottom of every invoice, in small but permanent print. They'll see one name, Linnell. I wasn't expecting another email from them. Not after the license agreement had been signed and the contract returned with a hasty digital signature. The control was mine now. That part was done. But on Saturday morning, as I skimmed through the filtered folder in my inbox, usually where receipts and spam get trapped. I saw it. Subject, exit interview request. Help us improve. It was from Oralis HR. A generic link to a feedback form. No direct message, no apology, no thank you. Just a checkbox at the bottom. Would you be open to being contacted for follow-up? I nearly deleted it, but something about the mechanical coldness of it made me click instead. The interface was sterile. The questions laughably naive. What did you appreciate most about your time at All Release? What could we have done differently to support your growth? Would you recommend Arliss to a friend? I answered everyone, not out of spite, not to get even, just because I owed the truth to myself. I listed my contributions: clean, factual, unimpeachable, authored 2.1 million lines of secure code, designed and led the launch of Linnell Core, 2018, sole responder during the 2020 holiday breach, created redundancy protocols still in use across 5 verticals, and then came the box labeled Other Comments. I hesitated, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wasn't sure who would ever read it, or if it even mattered. Still, I started typing. I was here before the logo was finalized, before the walls had art, before Oralis had a mission statement. I worked 12-hour days through 3 reorgs, 2 acquisitions, and a cyber attack that could have sunk the company. I trained 6 managers. I never got a formal title change until year 7. And when I was promoted, it lasted 2 days. I'm not angry anymore, but I want this to be on record. I never once heard the words, "Thank you," not once. I hit submit. It didn't feel like catharsis. It felt like sealing a time capsule and burying it under a tree that no longer existed. I got up and refilled my coffee, resisting the urge to open my laptop again. It was Saturday. The rain had stopped. There was no emergency to handle, no system to check. And then, 5 minutes later, another ping. Subject, reminder, submit Q2 hours, deadline approaching. I stared at it for a moment, baffled. It was an auto-notification from the same time tracking system I had helped build in 2019. The email read, "Please ensure your timesheet is completed for Q2 billing before Friday to avoid delays in payroll processing." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because even after everything, their system still had me listed as an active contributor. Somewhere deep in the back end, a forgotten permission flag was still toggled to yes. At the bottom of the email was the standard footer. If you believe this message was sent in error, please contact your administrator. I whispered to the screen. I was the administrator. No one else knew how many systems still bore my silent fingerprint. I deleted the message. Not out of anger, not even out of irony, just as a small, quiet signal to myself that I didn't owe them anything, not time, not answers, not explanations. The feedback form was the last page of a chapter I hadn't realized I was still holding on to. Letting go didn't come with fanfare. There was no audience, just the soft closing of a digital door. And for once, I didn't need it to slam. I stood, opened the window slightly, and breathed in the clean air. It smelled like something new. Something after. Monday morning arrived like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. A week ago, I was clapping in a conference room, smiling through my own promotion. 6 days ago, I was escorted out of that same building with a cardboard box and no goodbye. Today, I pressed one final key, linnellsystems.net, live. I sat back and let the page load. The background was clean, gray over white, soft gradient, sharp edges. A single headline pulsed at the center of the screen. Built to hold, designed to last, powered by Engine Vera TM. Not Oralis Secure, not Core Alpha, not even Linnell V3. No disguises this time, just the truth. I had spent my whole career writing code for someone else's nameplate, putting patches on someone else's timeline, watching men like Malcolm take credit, then casually replace the hands that built their empire. Not this time. This time. The name belonged to me. I clicked into the live dashboard. A quiet hum of activity already registered. 4 countries pinging the server. 1 from Rotterdam. 1 from Tokyo. My inbox dinged. Hi, Ms. Linnell. We saw your system launch. Would love to schedule a demo. Looking to pivot away from Oralis by Q3. Congrats. I recognized the domain. A logistics firm Oralis had pitched last year and lost. I didn't reply, just flagged it and wrote in my notebook. Demo, Wednesday, after lunch. I closed the tab and leaned back in my chair. The sunlight caught on the edge of my coffee mug, gold foil lettering that read, She Who Builds. It had been a gift from an intern, years ago, and almost on cue. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the message didn't need a name. I saw the launch. Engine Vera. Thank you. I always knew. I smiled before I could stop myself. It was Jackson, the intern from the winter chaos of 2020. The kid who stayed late asking questions when everyone else went home for eggnog and bonuses. The one I taught to write an overnight backup script by hand. He stayed because he wanted to learn. I stayed because I wanted to believe someone still cared. And now, someone did. I set the phone down. Didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, because the moment was complete on its own. Sometimes closure doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it comes with a text from someone who remembered. I walked to the window. Far in the distance, on the other side of the city skyline, the mirrored glass of the Oralis building caught the morning sun. It looked cold now, smaller. I thought I'd feel hatred, or at least triumph. But I didn't. Just stillness. They hadn't ruined me. They'd revealed me. And I hadn't burned a bridge. I just built my own across the canyon. No ashes, no wreckage, just distance. And a name carved clean across the steel. Linnell. I sat down one last time and opened my journal. Not to write code, but to write intention. This was never about revenge, I wrote. It was about authorship. Then I closed the journal, shut the laptop, and picked up the mug. Outside, the city moved on. But now, it moved through systems I built, with code that carried my name, on a platform I owned. And in the silence of that truth, I finally felt free. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is build quietly and let your name speak for itself. I didn't burn the bridge. I didn't scream. I didn't seek revenge the way they expected. I just built something they couldn't erase and finally signed my name at the bottom. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel like a placeholder, then maybe this story felt familiar. I was there too. I know what it's like to give your all and get silence in return, but I also know what it means to reclaim your work and your worth. That's why I told this story, not for attention, but for someone out there who's still holding back, still doubting, still waiting for permission. You don't need permission, you need courage. If this hit home for you, I'd love to hear your voice. Drop a comment and share your moment of clarity. Like this video if you've ever built something alone. Share it with someone who's quietly holding the world together. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. You belong here. Because builders like us, we don't disappear. We just rise. Under our own name.